Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be learning about what are shifts in demand. In the previous video, we discussed about extension and contraction of demand, where we talked that whenever there's a change in price only, there would always be an extension or a contraction in demand, which was simply reflecting that there's a movement along the same demand curve. Because what we were trying to say was that whenever there's a change in price, the demand curve doesn't shifts, and we model that increase or decrease in demand via the same demand curve. But in this video, we learned that whenever factors other than price would change, which are also known as non-price factors, and I want you to write that down, non-price factors, there would be a shift in demand, right? Now we already know, guys, what demand is. Demand is how much consumers are willing and able to buy at different prices. But like I said just now, that price is not the only thing that affects demand. There are many non-price factors, and if those factors change, then the whole demand curve will shift either to the right or to the left. So remember that whenever a non-price factor changes, and we'll just see what those non-price factors are, but first let me just go through these diagrams. Whenever there's a change in the non-price factor and the demand curve shifts to the right, it means that demand has increased. Now remember that whenever demand increases, it always increases at the same price. So for instance, let's say if the price of a good is $5 and the quantity that is being consumed is Q1, right? It could be any Q1, could be any units, 10 units, 20, whatever. And if, let's say, something changes, let's say your income goes up, so obviously that will increase your willingness and ability to buy more. And since price is not changing here, I mean, it will change on later, which we'll study in equilibrium. But when demand shifts, what we're trying to say is that demand has gone up irrespective of the price change. So it always shifts at the same price, meaning that, the price is the same and the demand curve shifts outwards. So this is something that you need to know, that whenever non-price factors change, that increases demand, but demand shifts at the same price. Later you'll study that, because when demand shifts, it would actually later on subsequently it will result in a new price, but you'll always show the shift. But always remember that whenever there's a shift in demand, it always shifts at the same price, right? Also, whenever demand goes down, this is representing, so for instance, if at $5 you were buying, let's say, Q1 units, and if, let's say, your income goes down, or maybe the advertising is really bad and you stop buying the product, or you just there are many others like you who are not consuming that product anymore, let's say, or you guys reduce your demand, so that will definitely reduce the demand. But here the demand is not going down because the price has gone up. Here the demand is going down because of some other reason. So that is why we want to differentiate the contraction in demand via a shift in demand to the left, because in contraction in demand we studied that when the price goes up, that is what causes the quantity to go down, like, right? So in this diagram we can see a contraction, that demand is going down from Q1 to Q2, movement along the same demand curve, contraction in demand because of a rise in price. But this is showing that demand is going down from Q1 to Q2 because of a change in any other factor, that other than price, basically a non-price factor, right? Similarly, in extension of demand as well, we studied that whenever demand extends, it is because of a fall in price, right? And we assume that all of the factors are constant, ceteris paribus, and when price goes down, quantity demanded extends along the same demand curve. But here the quantity demanded is going up, not because price is changing, but price is the same. It's the same $5 price, but you now are buying more because of something else being changing, right? So any non-price factor changing. So this is basically a shift in demand to the right. Now let's go through the factors that could affect demand, and this is something that you should be knowing. So number one, the most foremost important factor is changes in income. So remember, guys, income is basically how much it influences your purchasing power. So if people earn more incomes, they buy more, demand increases, it shifts to the right, and so you'll make this diagram shift to the right. Similarly, if people earn less, they buy less, demand shifts to the left. So obviously, if salaries would rise, people would end up buying more goods, like more clothes, more shoes, more smartphones. But here is something that your economic syllabus differentiates. It wants you to remember that there are two types of goods: normal goods and inferior goods, and they both behave differently with respect to changes in income. So firstly, the keyword that you need to know is that changes in income affects your purchasing power, right? It affects the ability to buy more or less. And for most products, remember that whenever the incomes would rise, demand would rise. And there's a positive relation between income and demand. So most products therefore are referred to as normal goods, and normal goods are those goods whose demand rises when income rises. And these are usually luxury goods, let's say. And it's not necessary that all these goods should be luxuries. Even if they are not luxury goods, still for most goods, demand rises when income rises, right? Watches, smartphones, cars, right? And then there is another category of goods that economists differentiate, and that is inferior goods. And what economists have observed is that for inferior goods, demand actually rises when income falls. And because what happens is that when income falls, your purchasing power goes down. So instead of buying maybe expensive goods, you will end up buying inferior goods, which are sort of low quality goods. For instance, if you were consuming an imported let's say you were consuming imported butter, you'll probably switch to cheap margarine. So cheap margarine is an inferior good, right? And they have a negative relation with income. So similarly, so demand for inferior goods will rise when income falls, and demand for inferior goods will fall when incomes rise, because the demand for inferior goods will fall when incomes rise. So demand curve will shift to the left for inferior goods when income rises, and the reason is that people will switch to better quality or superior goods, like normal goods, basically. Okay. So this is one thing that you need to know, right? Secondly, another thing that is very important is changes in the price of substitutes. So now here you need to understand that, let's say if the price of good X goes down, the demand for good X will go up, but this would be represented by via an extension in demand. So if the price, let's say here you are measuring the price of X, and this is the quantity of X and quantity demanded of X, basically. If the price of good X goes down, then the quantity demanded of good X will go up. Now this is an extension in demand. But if, let's say, the price of good Y goes down, and good Y is a substitute for X, like X and Y are substitutes, so people could either consume Y or X, just like the same thing, just like having Coke or Pepsi. So if the price of Y goes down, then the demand for good X will shift to the left, because people will consume more Y and less of X. So the demand for good X will shift to the left from, let's say, D1 to, let's say, D2. We know that demand always shifts at the same price. So demand for X is going to go down from Q1 to Q2. And this is representing a fall in demand. And a lot of people think that they usually question us by saying that, you taught us that when price changes, there's a movement along the same demand curve. Well, that's right. When price changes, there's a movement along the same demand curve. But then over there, the price of that same good is changing. So there's a movement along the demand curve of that particular good. Here the price of X is not changing, but the price of Y is changing, and Y is a related good for X, and related in terms of that they both are substitutes. So if the price of Y goes down, then the demand curve for X will shift either to the if price of Y goes down, then the demand curve for X will shift to the left. Reason being that X and Y are substitutes. So now let's sort of look at this in more detail. First, you need to know that what is the changes in price of related products. Like this should be changes in the price of the product. It shouldn't be changes in the price of a product, but it should be changes in the price of the related good or related product, right? And goods could be related in two terms. Economists classify them into two categories: substitutes or complements. So if we talk about substitutes, there are two types. So see, substitutes. What are substitutes? Substitutes are goods that could be used instead of each other, like Pepsi and Coke, or let's say maybe diesel and petrol could also be classified as substitute. Not exactly perfect substitutes, or not exactly very good substitutes, but they could be weak substitutes. But a good textbook example that you can give is Pepsi and Coke. So if the price of Pepsi rises, if Pepsi becomes expensive, then people will demand more Coke. So the demand curve for Coke will shift to the right. Okay, so let's say if this is Pepsi, this is Pepsi, and this is the demand curve for Coke, and let's say that Pepsi becomes expensive. So if the price of Pepsi goes up, then quantity demanded for Pepsi will go down. So this is the demand curve for Pepsi. So quantity demanded for Pepsi will go down, right? But this will actually shift the demand curve for Coke to the right. Why? Because, and like I said, if you see that the price of Pepsi is going up, there's a movement along the same demand curve for Pepsi. But that is actually shifting the demand curve outwards or to the right simply for Coke. People are demanding more Coke, and which is modeled or diagrammatically shown by an outwards to a rightward shift in the demand for Coke, and vice versa, right? So this is how this is how substitutes work. And we can also look at this relation for complements. And first, let's see what complements are. So complements are goods that are jointly demanded. So the word that you need to use is jointly demanded. They both are jointly demanded. For example, a car works without car can't work without petrol. A pen cannot write without ink, right? So, for example, car and petrol. Now, if petrol is very expensive, if the price of petrol reaches very high, then obviously the demand for cars will fall, right? And even if, let's say, if the price of cars goes down, if cars become very cheap in Pakistan, let's say, then people will buy more cars. So if the price of cars goes down, and this is, by the way, the demand curve for cars, if the price of cars goes down, people will buy more cars. There would be an extension in demand for cars. But let's see how will that impact petrol demand. Obviously, demand for petrol will go up because when people will buy more car, they need more fuel to run that car, right? So car and petrol are jointly demanded. So this is going to shift the demand curve for petrol to the right. But obviously, since the price of car falling is the price of a related good falling, and so the demand for the complement, which is the petrol, is going to shift to the right. Okay. So jointly demanded goods complements, they are basically used together. You need to know that. Another example. So yeah. So if let's say if you talk about travel insurance, if travel insurance becomes cheaper, then demand for holidays to most of the destinations will increase. So again, travel insurance and holiday destination demand are complement, right? So got it. This is something that you need to know. Another thing that you need to know, another factor that is most commonly also tested in MCQs and given in the textbooks, is about advertising. So you have like good advertising versus bad advertising. So good advertising, or some textbooks also call it persuasive advertising, it increases the popularity of the product and it increases the demand for that product, right? While negative publicity would decrease the demand. So let's say a very strong advertising campaign by a company would increase its sales, and let's say it would shift the demand curve to the right, while negative publicity or maybe a health scandal may decrease the demand or shift the demand to the left. So that is about advertising. Okay, something that you need to know as well. So successful persuasive advertising campaign will increase the demand for the product because it will bring some new people into the market to demand it as well, because some new customers will notice the product, and not only some new customers will enter the market to buy it, but it may also encourage some existing customers to purchase larger quantities of the product. So that's why demand shifts to the right. Another thing that you need to know is, another thing that increases demand is basically the population changes. And when we talk about population changes, what we're saying is, basically changes in population affects the number of consumers. So what happens is that if population increases, the demand for the goods and services rises. And if population decreases, then demand would fall. So let's say population could increase for multiple reasons. Let's say there's an increase in birth rate, or let's say there's a decrease in birth rate, or let's say there's more people coming into the country, so there's an increase in immigration rate. I mean, the net migration is positive. So if the net migration is positive, more people coming into the country than going out, population should go up. So if let's say more families are moving into your city, that increases the demand for, let's say the demand for houses will go up, the demand for schools will go up, the demand for food will go up, the demand for transport will go up as well. So if there are more people coming into the country, so if there's more population growth, be it because of a fall in death rate, because of a rise in birth rate, or let's say because of a net migration being positive, then demand for houses, schools, food and transport will shift to the right. Right, guys? So this is something that you need to know as well. And similarly, if there's a rise in birth rate, that will increase the demand for children's clothing or demand for toys, right? Similarly, changes in taste and fashion is again very important thing, because certain products demand may be influenced by changes in taste and fashion, especially products such as food, clothing and entertainment. For example, these days there's a rise in vegetarianism. I mean, vegetarianism being people are consuming more vegetables and less meat, maybe because of health reasons. So that has caused the demand for meat to decrease, right? Health reports can have a significant influence on the demand for particular foods, right? Or maybe there's a rise in popularity of pedal these days, or rise in popularity of football. Football was again very popular, but there's a rise in popularity of pedal these days, especially in Asia and the USA, which has increased the demand for that sport and increased the demand for pedal equipment and sports clothing and all of that, and the related merchandise as well. So this is something that you need to know. So this is basically what do we mean when we say so. And if let's say something, so it's also something could become more fashionable, like these days, in the previous this last year, there was this these bottles. I forgot the name of that water bottle. Those I forgot that name, those large bottles, but if you guys do remember it, you can mention it in the comments. It was these Stanley Cups. Yeah, Stanley Cups. Anyways, demand increases. So if the good becomes more fashionable or trendy or popular, they were becoming more fashionable, more trendy, and popular, and those Labubu dolls as well. So if then demand will increase, and if demand would fall if it becomes unfashionable or outdated, or maybe let's say you can say that a viral TikTok trend can increase the demand for certain snacks or certain outfits, right? Good example that you can give. Also, in economics, there are some other factors as well that could influence demand, such as maybe other factors like um, let's say changes in weather conditions is something that could affect seasonal demand. Like it will impact the demand, such as, for example, there's maybe there's a monsoon season coming in, so demand for umbrellas will go up, or demand for certain clothing will go up because of certain weathers, or demand for winter clothing will go up, or sweaters and hoodies and sweat. When there are more winters. Also, in other factors, there's another thing that is usually it has been tested once or twice in the MCQs, is about consumers' expectation regarding prices to rise in the future or not. So let's say that if consumers expect that future prices can rise, let's say consumer expecting that, I mean, this is an expectation. Right now, prices haven't really gone up. But if consumers are expecting prices to rise in the future, they will start buying more now so that they can take the advantage of cheaper product being right now, because ultimately they're expecting it to go up. So demand will immediately shoot up and demand will shift to the right in that way. And if consumers are expecting price to fall, they will wait. They will not buy it. So even the existing consumers who once used to buy it, they would start waiting. They would hold on demand. So demand will shift to the left, demand will decrease. I mean, a basic example is that just think now that just imagine that if students think that the price of laptops will increase next month, so probably they may start buying more now, or they may start buying now, hence shifting the demand curve to the right. So that's all, guys, for changes in demand, and we are done with demand. We're going to be starting supply in the next video. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like it, share it with your friends so that they may know about my channel, and subscribe to my channel as well. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, take care.